Hello and welcome to the Acculogs Introduction Training video. The first item I'd like to discuss is how to launch Acculogs. The first method is to go to the Data tab, find a specific well using the Quick Search tool. Today I'm going to use the UWI 4, 8, 65, 23 west of 5 and add this to a data card. From the data card, we have a tool in our ribbon called the Logs Viewer. If we click on this, it will launch Acculogs. The first option is to select our zone of interest. Today, I'm going to go from the Duvernay to the total depth. Here we are seeing Acculogs in a single well viewer mode. First, let's describe the general layout of our single well viewer mode. At the top, we have our well header. Below that is our log header. And below this, we have our different tracks. At the bottom, we can see our well report. Acculogs is a template-driven program. To demonstrate this, I want to show you a different view. Under the View menu, we will go to Index. Here you can see the very template-oriented aspect of Acculogs. The next step is to set up our preferences. From the Edit menu, we'll go down to Preferences. The General tab is where we can change our font as well as the units. I'm going to change our units to metric. Click on Apply. And working our way down the template layout, I'll start with our well header. Here we can change some dimensions, our font, our header fields, and select which fields we'd like to display. Next we have our log header. Here is where we can choose the option whether or not to show our log header. We can then customize how our tracks look, changing the dimensions and the font. And at the bottom, we have the option of changing our well report. We can change some visibility options, turning the well report on or off, showing the DSTs and showing production, as well as changing some font, dimension, and sizing options. We can also change some preferences for our map title, turning the legend on and off, scale bar, as well as a title block, and some properties for each of these components. We then want to organize our template and decide which types of logs we want visible on our template. If we go to Log Layout, we can choose which logs and depth track we want to see in our template. Currently, we're seeing the raster porosity log, a depth track, and the raster resistivity log. Today, I'd like to add an additional track to this template by clicking Add. Choosing the type of format, I want to choose a digital, and then I want to choose composite petrophysical log. Click on OK. We then have the option to export this template for later use. I can then click on Apply to apply the changes I've made, as well as apply and save as default if I'd wish to have my current settings set as the default for the single well view. One thing to note is that this will not save the preferences for your cross-section view. We can then go to the Log Search tab and set our preferences for our log search priority. For example, we can change the priority of the image type. Currently, the main pass is the main priority, and repeat pass is the second priority. For method, we can change the priority for any of the log types. We can also change the depth type priority, the scale, and the depth coverage. I'd now like to discuss the navigation tools within Acculogs. First, I'm going to change our view back to the detail. On our toolbar, we have a number of navigation tools. The first of which is a zoom in tool. Simply we'll zoom in 2 times, or we have a zoom out tool, zooming out 2 times. The next navigation tool is a net select zoom, where we can click and drag to zoom into a specific portion of our logs. To deactivate your tool, you simply need to right-click. Our next navigation tool is a magnifying lens. You can see it turns your cursor into a magnifying glass. We also have some shortcuts to help with your navigation. To scroll up and down through your log segments, you can use the scroll button on your mouse, or if you hold down the control key, you can zoom in and out using your scroll button. There are also some handy object highlighting, info tooltips, and depth tips to give you useful information about your logs. Currently, info tips, object highlighting, and depth tips are all turned off. If I turn on my object highlighting, you'll see each item gets highlighted with a green color. If I turn on my depth tips and info tips, you'll see a tooltip describing some information. You'll also note that if I leave my cursor in one location, it will toggle between the depth tips and the info tips. All 3 of these options are customizable. If we go to Tools, we can change our visual cues preferences. For the info tips, we can change some color attributes as well as increase or decrease the delay. I'm going to increase our delay to 4,000 milliseconds. For the depth tips, we can also change some preferences. For the object highlighting, we can enable or disable, change the size of the highlight as well as the color. Now, if I leave my cursor in one location, it will take 4 seconds for my info tips to pop up. Our last navigation tool is the jump function. This can be found underneath the Tools menu. Here we have the option to quickly jump to any of our tops or to one of our tracks. So that is an introduction to the general layout of our single well view. Let's now move on to the cross-section view. I'm going to zoom in to a previously saved and created cross-section. Select the cross-section from my drop-down menu, and then I'm going to center this cross-section on my map. Then going to zoom in. Here we can see my previously created cross-section. From the cross-section panel, we're able to change properties of our cross-section, changing the name and description. Or if we select and right-click on our cross-section, we can rename or save to a well list. Additionally, if we select the cross-section we'd like to work with in Acculogs, we have Launch Acculogs button. First, we would like to set our zone of interest. I'm going to select from the Duvernay to the Gilwood. and then select the Acculogs launch button. Here we can see our cross-section in the index view. First, let's change our view to the detailed view. Navigation is very similar to the single well viewer. We have the same tools, however the jump feature is replaced with the explorer bar. If we expand one of our wells and one of the tracks for that well, and then the log segments, we can simply double-click on one of the tops to quickly zoom to that top. In the cross-section view, we have some additional preferences that we can change. We go to Edit, Preferences. We can change our well spacings under the Spacing tab. Here we can have our well-to-well spacing in a fixed platform or a relative to their map spacing. Additionally, we can change the spacing for each of the components within that well. And lastly, we can change some legend, scale, and title preferences. In our second well in our cross-section, you may notice for the porosity log that there is two spliced images. If we go to Wells, Log Selection, we can see why that is and make some adjustments. If we select the second well in our cross-section, we can see that for the porosity log, there is a log from the section 10859 to 10937, and then a new section from 10937 to 11407. These images were selected based on our priorities that we set in the log selection preferences. If you wish, you can manually select different log images to be viewed on your template. Our next option is to display our cross-section using different datums. In our toolbar, we have a number of different datum selections. The first of which is using no datum. This simply just pushes all of the logs up to the top of the screen. Next is our drill depth datum. After that, we have a sea level datum. The fifth option is a freeform mode, where we can go in and change the location of our logs by freehand. Or we have a stratigraphic datum. To use our stratigraphic datum, we simply need to select the top in which we'd like to set our datum to. From the Tops tab and Datums, we can go to Select. Under the datum type, we'll select stratigraphic, and then we want to choose which top we'd like to set our datum for. I'm going to select the slave point, click on Add, and then OK. Now you can see that our cross-section is now set to the slave point datum. However, our fourth well in our cross-section does not have a slave point top picked. That is where we can use our next tool for our tutorial today, which is the tops picking tool. This tool is available from our toolbar, which is the Pick Tops tool. I want to select the slave point top for my fourth well. If I click on a section of my well, it will add the slave point top for me. To deactivate the tool, right-click. Now, if we select our stratigraphic datum again, you'll see the fourth well gets aligned to our slave point datum. We also have the option to edit our tops. If we go to the Edit menu, Preferences, and the Tops tab, we can change many different settings. One setting in particular is our display attributes, either using a cycle of different colors or using one fixed color for all of the tops. You can also change some specific attributes by going to the Tops tab and Control. This is where we can add additional tops to our cross-section or change the attributes for the currently visible tops. If I would like to add a submember for one of my formations, say I want to add a slave point A member, I can search for that formation within the list, or I can type it in. I can then add a sub designation to my slave point top. I'm going to add slave point A and add this to my list of tops. I can then select this top and change the attributes. Change the line style as well as a fill pattern and contact type. I'm going to change the fill pattern to a sandstone and create this as an unconformity. Then going to pick my slave point A member through my entire cross section. As you can see, the top has been added to each well as the fill has been added in between the different wells. If you'd like to see this fill behind the wells, you can simply change the images to be transparent. Lastly, you can also click and drag to change any of the currently assigned tops. If I would like to change my Beaver Hill Lake top, I can simply click on it and drag and change the location of this top. One thing to note, for your top changes to take effect, you simply need to go to the Tops menu and save your user tops. If any of your tops you would like to reset to the system tops, you can simply right-click on them and convert back to the system top. The next item I'd like to discuss is the digital logs. First, I'm going to add digital logs to my cross-section view. From the Wells menu, I can select Log Layout. Here's where I can select which logs are displayed on my template. I'm going to remove my 3 currently viewed logs and add in a new digital log. Format Digital, type Composite Petrophysical. Click on OK for the changes to take place. Now we can see the Composite Petrophysical log track for each of my wells. In Acculogs, there are a number of different settings that we can change for our digital logs. From the Digital menu, we can change our curve definitions. This is where we can see all of the different available curves, as well as a list of all of the different aliases used for that curve. If we'd like to enter our own proprietary LAS files that are using a different alias, we can simply right-click and add a new alias. Also, from the digital menu, we can change our display templates. This is where we can customize the different digital display templates. For the composite petrophysical curve, we can see all of the different subtracks and the curves belonging to each of those subtracks. If you wish, you can right-click to add additional subtracks or additional curves. Also, at the bottom of the list are a number of different digital templates that you can create and customize for yourself. We can also change our shading rules. Right now we have a number of shading rules set for our current digital log template. You have 3 different types of shading rules you can create: a curve to constant, curve to curve or a constant to curve. And then you can select the curve or the constant you'd like to assign those shading rules to, as well as a color. Lastly, we can change our cutoff zones and petrophysical definitions. Under the cutoff zone, we can create a flag or a strip on a certain section of our digital logs that coincides to specific criteria that we've selected. In the petrophysical definitions, we can select our stratigraphy range and petrophysical settings to create an on-the-fly generated petrophysical curve, showing the volume of shale created from two different algorithms, either the Archie or the modified Simandou, as well as selecting where your porosity will be calculated from. Lastly, if you'd like to print and share your newly created cross-section, you can do that from the File menu. If you go to File, Page Setup, you can select some properties for changing your print setup. You can select your paper size, the source, the orientation, as well as some scaling options. If we then go to File, Print Preview, you can see a preview of how our print will look. So that concludes our Acculogs training video. Thank you very much for listening.